Tonight, we're going to relax with a quiet Elden Ring fact that most players never really think about. Long before the Erd Tree, before demigods, and before the Shattering, the world may have begun with something called the One Great, a single existence that was fractured by the greater will itself. So while you watch the Elden Ring Night Rain gameplay in the background, you can ignore the action and just focus on my voice, the lore, and hopefully drift off to sleep. Also, I know the voice quality still needs work, but I'm improving it for the next video, and working on it. So if you enjoy these calm lore videos, please subscribe, leave a like, and share. Let's begin.
Before the golden tree ever cast its light across the lands between, before demigods walked the earth, before queens, before wars, before the very concept of death was sealed away like a shameful secret, there was something else. Something older. Something that the game barely whispers about, hidden in item descriptions and incantation texts that most players scroll past without a second thought. This is where the true story of Elden Ring begins. Not with the tarnished, not with the shattering, but with a cosmic event so ancient that even the gods who rule the lands between have likely forgotten it. The greater will and the fracture of the one great at the very top of Elden Ring's hierarchy of power sits an entity called the greater will. You never see it, you never speak to it. It communicates through intermediaries, through golden fingers, through beasts, through chosen vessels. It is essentially a god above gods, an outer god of order, obsessed with structure, hierarchy, and control over the chaos of existence. And according to the deepest lore in the game, in the very beginning, the greater will fractured something called the One Great, and from that fracture came divisions, births, and souls. Think about that for a moment. Before individuality, before separate beings and separate lives, there was one unified thing, the One Great, a singular existence. And the greater will, for reasons we are never fully told, chose to shatter it, to divide it, to create the multiplicity of existence we now call reality. This is not so different from creation myths across human history. The idea that existence began with a primordial unity being broken apart, that all things, all life, all death, all consciousness are simply fragments of something that was once whole. Elden Ring takes that ancient idea and makes it cosmic, cold, and deeply unsettling, because here's the thing. The greater will didn't shatter the One Great out of love, or creativity, or a desire to fill a void universe with beauty. It did so because it wanted order. It wanted hierarchy. It wanted beings it could arrange, control, and direct. The fracture of the One Great was not a gift, it was a project. The Elden Beast and the primeval current, once the fracture happened and souls began to exist, the greater will needed a way to impose its will upon the world it had helped create. It needed an agent. Something it could send into the lands between, the place where, for some reason, all death inevitably drifts, to serve as a living embodiment of its design. It sent two things through what is called the primeval current, a kind of cosmic river or conduit between the greater will's realm and the physical world. The first was its daughter, Meta, the mother of fingers. The second was the Elden Beast, a vast, luminous creature of golden light, living runes, and absolute cosmic power. The Elden Beast is fascinating because it is not a weapon or a tool in a simple sense. It held within it the power of runes and was the living embodiment of order itself. It didn't just carry order, it was order. Every law of the lands between, every rule governing life and death and grace, flowed through this creature. And then, at some point in a history so ancient no living being remembers it firsthand, the Elden Beast was forged, shaped, compressed, transformed from a living creature into a structure, into what we call the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring, the thing you spend the entire game trying to repair, is not a piece of jewelry. It's not a crown. It is the concentrated, crystallized form of a cosmic being. It is a living entity that has been turned into a prison of pure order, And whoever holds it, whoever becomes its vessel, becomes the physical anchor of the greater will's power in the lands between. That is the object at the center of this story. Not a ring. A god collapsed into a shape. Before the Erd Tree, the older world now here is where the lore becomes something players genuinely overlook. When most people think of Elden Ring's world, they imagine the golden Erd Tree, that enormous spectral tree that dominates every horizon, visible from almost anywhere in the lands between. They assume it has always been there, that it is the foundation, the beginning. It is not. Players who dig carefully through item descriptions can find something called root resin, an item originating from the roots of the great tree, a precursor to the Erd Tree. The Erd Tree replaced something. Before the golden, orderly tree that bleeds amber light and governs the cycle of rebirth, there was a different tree, a primordial one. The great tree, or sometimes referenced as the great tree, and it was not golden. It was not an instrument of the greater will. It was older, wilder, something rooted in the lands between itself rather than imported from a cosmic authority. The incantation called Protection of the Erd Tree actually details the Erd Tree's struggle against opposition, suggesting that when it arrived, it actively worked to subdue and overpower the older, already existing great tree. This paints a completely different picture. The Erd Tree didn't grow naturally in the lands between. It fought for its place there. It displaced something that was already there, something that may have had its own relationship with the land and its people. The greater will didn't gift the lands between a tree of life, it sent a colonizing force, and it gets darker. Souls of the deceased within the lands between are said to be fed to the Erd Tree or the greater will. This hints at the outer god's strategic move to exploit the potential power of the great tree, making the Erd Tree essentially a parasite sent to gain control and influence in the region. The tree that everyone in the lands between worships, the symbol of grace, of rebirth, of divine blessing is, according to the hidden law, a parasite. It feeds on the dead. It metabolizes souls. And it does so on behalf of a distant cosmic entity that has never once shown genuine care for the people living in its shadow. Dragon Lord Placidusax, the Elden Lord before Marika, and if that wasn't enough to unsettle your view of this world, consider the existence of Dragon Lord Placidusax. He is one of the hardest optional bosses in the game, found in crumbling Farum Azula, literally at the edge of time itself. A massive, two-headed dragon with golden lightning, curled into a resting position in the sky, like something that has simply been waiting for so long it has forgotten what it was waiting for. Most players fight him and move on, but the lore surrounding him changes everything. Evidence from the remembrance of the Dragon Lord indicates the existence of life and an Elden Lord, Dragon Lord Placidusax, before the Erd Tree ever arrived in the lands between. Let that land. There was a civilization, a world, an Elden Lord before Marika, before the Erd Tree. Before the Golden Order, we see crumbling around us in the game. Placidusax was chosen by a god, a different god, one that came before the greater will, or perhaps operated alongside it, to rule over the lands between. He was an Elden Lord in an age where the rules were completely different. And then the greater will arrived. The Erd Tree was planted, the old order was overwritten, and Placidusax, this enormous ancient king of an older world, was left behind. His god abandoned him. He retreated to Farum Azula, to the edge of time, and simply waited for an eternity. Waiting for a god that never came back. When you fight him, you are not fighting a villain. You are fighting the last remnant of a world that was erased, and he is still loyal, still waiting. Still crouched at the precipice of time, his two heads, one severed, one intact, testimony to battles fought in the service of a god that no longer exists. What this all means, the opening of Elden Ring's lore, is not a story of divine blessing. It is a story of cosmic replacement. A distant, powerful entity fractured the unity of existence, sent a living embodiment of its will into the world, planted a parasitic tree to feed on the dead. erased a prior civilization that was already there, and then chose a mortal woman, Marika, to serve as its vessel and impose this new order on everyone. And all of that happened before the game even begins. Everything the player experiences, the shattering, the wars, the demigods, the madness spreading across the land, is downstream of this original act. The Greater will build a world not for the people in it, but for itself. And when that world began to break down, it didn't fix it. It simply waited for a new tarnished servant to come along and patch it back together. That is the foundation beneath the lands between. Not grace, not divinity. Not love, a fracture, a parasite, and a very long wait. Who was Marika before she was a god? This is one of the most fascinating and underexplored threads in all of Elden Ring's lore. Marika was not born a goddess. She was born a mortal, and not just any mortal, but specifically an Empyrean. In the lore of the lands between, Empyreans are rare individuals born without a father, or more precisely, born outside the normal framework of the Golden Order's lineage. They are considered candidates, beings the two fingers, intermediaries of the greater will, can potentially select to become the next vessel of the Elden Ring. Long ago, the two fingers directed the Empyrean Marika to claim godhood at the gate of divinity and become the next vessel for the Elden Ring. Think about what that means practically. A woman, mortal, finite, breakable, was approached by cosmic intermediaries of an unknowable outer god and essentially told, "We have chosen you. Go to the gate of divinity. Ascend. Become the container for the most powerful force in the known world." And she did it. But the path to godhood was not a coronation. It was a war. The war against the giants. Before Marika could plant the Erd tree and establish the Golden Order, she had to deal with a problem. The giants. The giants were ancient beings who had tended a different flame, the flame of ruin. This was the sacred fire of the fell god, an outer god diametrically opposed to the order-obsessed greater will. The fell god's flame was chaotic, consuming, and utterly incompatible with the kind of controlled, hierarchical reality the greater will wanted to impose on the lands between. Where the greater will wanted structure, the fell god wanted burning. Where the greater will wanted runes and order, the fell god wanted primal, devouring fire. So Marika went to war. Marika waged a violent war against the giants to upend the fell god and suppress the flame of ruin, using a golden seed to transform the primordial crucible of life into the Erd tree. This war was not a clean, heroic campaign. The giants were not monsters in a simple sense. They were guardians of something ancient and powerful. They were the keepers of a fire that predated the greater will's influence in the lands between. And Marika, this newly anointed vessel of cosmic order, systematically hunted them down and destroyed them. Almost all of them. She left one alive. One giant, at the peak of the mountaintops of the giants, was kept breathing, forced to tend the very flame that his people had died protecting. The cruelty of that decision is almost architectural in its precision. She didn't just conquer the giants. She left a survivor specifically to maintain the fire, so it could never be completely forgotten, but could never spread either. The last giant became a kind of living monument to defeat. That fire, the flame of ruin, still burns at the forge of the giants when the player arrives. A conquered flame, still alive, still waiting. And by the end of the game, you have to light it yourself, burning the Erd tree from the inside to open the path forward. Which means, in a deep irony that the game never explicitly states, the player uses the weapon of Marika's oldest enemies to break open the monument of her greatest victory. The Erd tree takes root, and the Age of Plenty begins with the giants defeated and the fell god suppressed. Marika was able to complete the transformation of the lands between. The primordial crucible of life, that raw, chaotic, early form of existence from which all things in this world originally grew, was converted. Refined. Turned golden, the Erd tree rose. This act ushered in an age of plenty. Empowered by soaring grace of gold, Godfrey, her first Elden Lord, and his warriors set out to conquer the entirety of the continent in her name. For a time, the lands between was genuinely prosperous. Grace flowed, people were blessed. The dead were recycled back into the world through the Erd Tree's roots, reborn, given another chance at life. The system worked. The Golden Order was a real thing, not just propaganda, because Marika had built it on a foundation of genuine cosmic power, and that power touched every living being in the lands between in some meaningful way. And at the center of it all stood Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, Marika's first husband. The man who made the expansion of the Golden Order possible through sheer, relentless military dominance. Godfrey, the Lord of the Battlefield, Godfrey, is one of the most quietly tragic figures in all of Elden Ring. By the time you encounter him as a boss, first as a golden phantom in the capital, then as his true self, Hoarah the warrior, in the final approach to the Erd Tree, he presents himself with a kind of raw, almost joyful ferocity. He is enormous. He fights with a massive axe and the force of a man who has never once stopped loving the act of battle. But the backstory of how he ended up as a ghost in a ruined city is heartbreaking. Long before the Shattering, Stormvale Castle was the seat of a mighty warrior known as the Stormlord. Leading Leyndell's forces to expand Marika's Golden Order, Godfrey defeated the Stormlord and claimed the castle for himself. The game of this is the life Godfrey led for years, decades, possibly much longer given the extended lifespans of those touched by grace. Campaign after campaign. Enemy after enemy. He fought the fell gods' worshippers, he fought the giants, he fought everyone who stood against the expansion of Marika's domain. He was the weapon of the Golden Order, and he wielded himself without complaint or hesitation. He won every war. He subdued every enemy. He conquered the continent, and then Marika took everything from him. The banishment of the tarnished Godfrey, by then known as the Lord of the Battlefield, fought until Marika's reign was absolute. When the last worthy enemy fell to his axe, the very same grace that had blessed him and his army was taken away by Marika. She didn't even give him a reason, really. She simply withdrew the grace. The divine light that had elevated Godfrey and his warriors, that had marked them as blessed, as chosen, as hers, was pulled back, extinguished, like a queen deciding a candle has served its purpose and blowing it out. She instructed them to wage another war and die abroad, with the promise that life and grace would be returned to them after death. All those stripped of their grace, as well as their descendants, were called tarnished and forced onto boats and across the sea of fog to carry out what was known as the Long March into the Badlands. The tarnished, the people you play as, the people who are slowly making their way back to the lands between across the entire runtime of the game, are the descendants of soldiers who won a war for a god and were thrown away for winning it too completely. They were useful when there were enemies. When peace arrived, they became inconvenient. There is a real-world resonance to this that is hard to miss. The veteran who comes home from war to find the society he fought for has no place for him. The soldier whose value was entirely contingent on the existence of conflict. Godfrey didn't fail. He succeeded so completely that he made himself obsolete, and Marika, divine, eternal, golden Marika, looked at the man who had given everything for her kingdom and sent him away. The removal of the rune of death, but the banishment of Godfrey, as dark as it is, pales next to another decision Marika made around this same period. A decision that would define the nature of the lands between for every generation that followed. She made death illegal. More precisely, she made true death impossible for those blessed by her grace. Marika removed the rune of death from the Elden Ring and commanded her loyal shadow, Malekith, to seal it away. Thus she, her demigod offspring, and those blessed by her grace of gold would live forever, earning her the title of Queen Marika the Eternal. Malekith is one of the most ferocious bosses in the entire game, a massive black-bladed beast who guards the rune of death in its sealed form. When you fight him, you are fighting Marika's most loyal enforcer, a being whose entire existence is defined by one sacred duty: keep the rune of death sealed, keep death out of the world. On the surface, this sounds like a gift, immortality for everyone touched by grace. No more permanent loss, no more grief, no more endings. The dead return through the Erd tree. Life perpetuates. But think about what this actually means at a deeper level. When you remove death from a world, you also remove the pressure that makes life meaningful. You remove the urgency, the stakes, the necessity of choice. And more darkly, you create a situation where the powerful can never truly be displaced. If Marika and her demigod children live forever, who challenges them? Who inherits the world when those in power simply never leave? Immortality, in this context, isn't a gift to humanity. It's a lock. It's a mechanism of control. The Golden Order isn't just a religion, it's a system that makes the ruling class literally unkillable. And Marika sits at the top of that system forever. Radagon, her other husband, her other self. Before we reach the shattering, we have to talk about Radagon. Because Radagon is where Marika's story becomes almost impossibly strange. Radagon was initially the husband of Queen Renala of the Full Moon, and together they had 3 children. He later left Renala to join Queen Marika, becoming her second husband and gaining the title of the second Elden Lord after Godfrey's banishment. On the surface, this reads as a political marriage, the great commander of the Golden Order's armies wedding the ruler of the Erd Tree. 2 powerful individuals consolidating power. It happens in history. It makes a certain practical sense. But then the game reveals the truth at the very end, in a moment that recontextualizes almost everything. This union took a surprising turn when it was revealed that Queen Marika was, in fact, Radagon. They are the same person, 2 halves of one being. Marika and Radagon are not 2 people who loved each other. They are one person who split into 2, or perhaps always existed as 2 and tried desperately to be one. The exact nature of their duality is left intentionally ambiguous. Did Marika become Radagon, or were they always simultaneously both? Did she create him? Did he exist independently and merge with her? Or are they simply 2 expressions of a single soul that the cosmic machinery of godhood forced apart? The game doesn't answer this directly. What it does tell you is that when Radagon married Renala, Marika was already a goddess, already the vessel of the Elden Ring. And Radagon, as her other self, went out into the world, fell in love, had children, built relationships, and then was called back, pulled away from Renala. Returned to Marika, to himself. What did Renala feel when the man she loved simply left? When he abandoned her and their children to return to the service of the Queen, not knowing, perhaps, that the Queen and her husband were the same soul. The tragedy of Renala's madness, her retreat into the library of Rhea Lucaria surrounded by her students, singing endlessly to a cracked amber egg, it makes a devastating kind of sense when you understand the full picture. She wasn't abandoned by a husband who stopped loving her. She was abandoned by a fragment of a god who had no choice but to return to itself. The architecture of the Golden Order, by the time the shattering begins, by the time everything falls apart, Marika has built something genuinely impressive. The lands between is a continent-spanning civilization governed by the power of the Erd Tree, held together by grace, protected by a royal family of demigod children, and ruled from the royal capital of Leyndell, where the Erd Tree's roots anchor the entire world. It is, by any reasonable measure, an achievement. A god built a world, she fought for it, she shaped it, she made the rules that govern it and the systems that sustain it, but underneath every gilded surface is the weight of what it cost: giants slaughtered, an older world erased, death itself removed from the natural order, soldiers blessed, used and exiled, a husband or a piece of herself torn away from someone who loved him genuinely for the sake of political and cosmic necessity. The Golden Order is magnificent. It is also a monument to Marika's willingness to sacrifice everything and everyone that stood between her and the world she wanted to build. And then she shattered the Elden Ring herself. Why she did it, and what happened after, is a story for the next segment. The night of the Black Knives, where it all began before the shattering, there was a single night that changed everything. A night so significant, so deliberately orchestrated, that its consequences ripple through every corner of the lands between for generations afterward. It is called the Night of the Black Knives. To understand it, you need to know about Godwyn the Golden, Marika's firstborn son, and by all accounts, one of the most genuinely beloved figures the Golden Order ever produced. Where many of the demigods are defined by arrogance, cruelty, or obsession, Godwyn was different. He was a warrior of real honor. He treated dragons as worthy enemies and, after defeating them, offered them respect rather than humiliation. He was, in the truest sense, golden, not just in his divine lineage but in his character, and he was the first to die. On the night of the Black Knives, a group of assassins wielding blades imbued with a fragment of the Rune of Death. Remember, the rune Marika had sealed away, the rune that was supposed to make true death impossible for those touched by grace, crept through the lands between and struck. They killed Godwyn's soul while leaving his body alive. And simultaneously, they killed the body of Ranni the Witch, one of Marika's demigod children, while leaving her soul intact. This is one of the most deliberate, precisely engineered acts of assassination in the game's history. 2 targets. 2 different kinds of death inflicted on each. One loses their soul but retains their body. The other loses their body but retains their soul. Godwyn became something the game calls a Prince of Death, a corpse without a soul, unable to truly die, unable to truly live, buried beneath the roots of the Erd tree where his deathless body slowly spread like a fungal corruption through the foundations of the world itself. If you go deep enough underground in the game, you find him, enormous, half fish, half root, his face pressed against the ground in a grotesque parody of sleep. He is one of the most haunting images in the entire game. A golden prince, beloved by all, reduced to a mindless, spreading horror in the dark beneath the world. Ranni, meanwhile, having shed her body deliberately, having orchestrated this entire event herself, transferred her soul into a small doll-like form and set off on her own agenda. An agenda that quietly runs parallel to the player's journey across the entire game. The Night of the Black Knives was Ranni's escape from the Golden Order. Her refusal to serve as the Greater, Will's next vessel. Her declaration of independence from a god she never consented to serve. But its consequences detonated across the lands between like a slow-burning explosion. Because the death of Godwyn, the first true death of a demigod, cracked something, not just politically, cosmically. The Rune of Death had been sealed away, and yet death had still found a way in. The system Marika built, the Immortal Order, had been violated, and Marika felt it. Marika shatters the Elden Ring. What happened inside Marika after the Night of the Black Knives is something the game approaches with deliberate ambiguity. But the pieces are there, scattered across item descriptions and environmental details, for those willing to look. Marika had built the Golden Order. She had removed death from the world. She had watched her firstborn son, the one she seemingly loved most deeply, be murdered in a way that should have been impossible under the very rules she created. The system she designed to protect her children had failed. The Rune of Death she had gone to such lengths to seal away had been weaponized against her own family, and she was also Radagon. She was 2 beings in one, and that duality, that fracture in her own self, may have been tearing her apart long before Godwyn ever died. Marika instructed her children to rise as lords or gods, or become sacrifices. Then she shattered the Elden Ring herself, fracturing the Golden Order and releasing its great runes into the lands between for her children to claim. She didn't drop it. She didn't lose it. She shattered it. Deliberately, with intention. Why? This is the question that lore scholars and fans have debated since the game launched. Some believe it was grief, that losing Godwyn broke her in a way nothing else could, and in her anguish, she destroyed the symbol of the order she had built. Some believe it was a calculated act of rebellion, that Marika, like her daughter Ranni, had grown to resent the greater will's control, and shattering the Elden Ring was her way of refusing to keep being its vessel. Some believe it was both. That the death of Godwyn broke the last thread of loyalty she felt toward the cosmic order she had spent her entire existence maintaining. And in that broken moment, she chose destruction over continuation. What we know for certain is this: after shattering the Elden Ring, Queen Marika was nowhere to be found. She was punished by the Elden Beast and imprisoned within the Erd Tree itself. The goddess who built the world was sealed inside the monument of her own greatest achievement. Imprisoned in the Erd Tree, the very tree she had planted, the very structure she had used the bones of dead giants to raise into the sky. There is a poetry to that punishment that feels almost intentional, as if the greater will wanted to make a statement. You built this. Now you are part of it. Forever, when the player finally reaches Marika at the very end of the game, after fighting through every demigod, burning the Erd Tree, crossing into the heart of the Golden Order, she is there, shattered, literally. Her body broken into fragments, suspended in the chains of Erd Tree wood, imprisoned in the place she once called sacred. She doesn't speak. She barely exists as a person anymore. She is simply a ruin, like everything else in the lands between. The shattering, a war with no winner. The demigods were each corrupted by the power of their great runes, triggering the shattering, a war from which no victor arose, leading to their abandonment by the greater will. When the Elden Ring broke, its great runes, the fragments of its power, scattered across the lands between and fell into the hands of Marika's children. And the runes corrupted them. Each one amplified something already present in the demigod who claimed it: existing traits, existing obsessions, existing darkness, and pushed those qualities past any reasonable limit. Godric the Grafted, already insecure and desperate for power, began grafting the limbs of his defeated enemies onto his own body in a grotesque attempt to accumulate strength. Rykard the Lord of Blasphemy, already contemptuous of the Golden Order, fed himself to a serpent god and became something half man, half serpent, inviting anyone who would join him to be consumed alongside him. Mohg the Lord of Blood began worshipping an outer god of blood and fire, building a dynasty of scarlet corruption in the underground, and the demigods went to war with each other. Enormous, world-scarring battles. The kind of conflicts that leave geological evidence, craters you can see on the map, scarred wastelands, ruined capitals. The greatest of these battles was Malenia versus Radahn, a fight so significant, so legendary, that people in the lands between still talk about it in hushed, reverent tones. But we'll get to them, because Malenia and Radahn deserve their own careful attention. Marika and Radagon, one soul, two bodies. Before we go further into the children, we need to fully unpack what it means that Marika and Radagon are the same being. Because this isn't a plot twist the game deploys casually. It is the thematic core of the entire story. The precise nature of their relationship, despite being the same person, remains shrouded in mystery. But here is what we can piece together from the available lore. Marika was chosen by the Greater Will to be its vessel, to house the Elden Ring within herself and serve as the physical anchor of cosmic order in the lands between. But godhood at that level is not something a single unified self can easily contain. The pressure of being simultaneously a mortal woman, a queen, a goddess, and a living container for the most powerful force in the world, it fractures a person. Literally, Radagon appears to be what happens when that fracture externalizes. A second self, another body. Another consciousness, with its own memories, its own relationships, its own sense of identity, and yet fundamentally the same soul as Marika, just expressed differently. There are details in the lore that suggest Radagon genuinely didn't know he was Marika for much of his existence. That he experienced himself as a separate person. That his love for Renala, his military campaigns in service of the Golden Order, his eventual return to Marika's side, all of this felt real and independent to him, even as it was in some sense Marika living a second life through a second body. And when Radagon was called back to Marika, when the two halves of this divided soul were reunited as her second Elden Lord, there is something deeply sad in what that means for Renala. The woman who loved Radagon didn't lose him to a rival. She lost him to himself, to his other self. To something she could never have competed with because it wasn't another person. It was who he already was. The game shows you this reunion in the final boss sequence. You fight Radagon first, golden, desperate, hammering away at you with divine power, trying to prevent you from reaching the Elden Ring. And when you defeat him, he doesn't die cleanly. He transforms. The Elden Beast erupts from within him, because Radagon was the vessel. He was Marika expressed in a different key. And inside them both, all along, was the living cosmic creature that they had agreed, or been forced, to contain. Malenia, the goddess of rot of all the demigods in Elden Ring, none carries the weight of tragedy quite like Malenia, Blade of Miquella. She is, by many measures, the hardest boss in the game. Her fight is a masterclass in brutality, fast, aggressive, punishing, with a heal mechanic that punishes passivity and aggression in equal measure. Players have spent hundreds of hours on her. She is iconic in the gaming community in a way very few individual boss encounters ever become. But the lore of who she is and why she exists is where her real power lies. Malenia is one of the two cursed children of Marika and Radagon, afflicted from birth with the Scarlet Rot, causing internal damage and resulting in the loss of several limbs. The Scarlet Rot is not a disease she caught. It is not something that happened to her. It is something she was born with, a consequence of the divine contradiction at the heart of her parents' existence. Marika and Radagon are two halves of one being, and somewhere in the cosmic machinery of their union, something went wrong. Their children paid the price. Malenia was born already decaying. The scarlet rot that blights entire regions of the lands between, that turned Caelid into a wasteland of crimson skies and festering creatures, lives inside her. It is her. By the time you find her in the game, she has lost both arms and one leg to the rot's progression, replacing them with golden prosthetics. She is simultaneously one of the most powerful beings in the lands between and a person whose body has been destroying itself since the moment she was born. And yet she never stopped fighting. Her entire life has been defined by the discipline required to contain something inside herself that wants to consume everything around her. Every battle she fights is also a battle against herself, against the rot that wants to bloom outward, to spread, to transform everything it touches into scarlet decay. She lost that battle once, against Radahn. The Battle of Ionia, when the rot bloomed, General Radahn was one of the most beloved and feared figures in the Shattering. A massive, gravity-defying warrior who had studied the arts of gravitational magic from the scholars of Celia. He was so enormous, his body swollen with power to the point where no normal horse could carry him, that he learned gravity magic specifically so he could ride his beloved horse, Leonard. Without crushing him, that detail alone, a god warrior who studied an entire school of magic because he loved his horse and didn't want to hurt him, tells you everything you need to know about Radahn. When Malenia and Radahn met on the battlefield of Ionia, it was the single most destructive encounter of the entire Shattering. Two of the mightiest demigods, neither willing to yield, neither capable of defeating the other through conventional means. And then, Malenia made a choice. She unleashed the Scarlet Rot. All of it. Everything she had spent her entire life containing, she released in a single catastrophic bloom. The rot erupted outward, consuming the battlefield, consuming Radahn, consuming the entire region and transforming what had been fertile land into what is now Caelid. That endless wasteland of crimson decay, where the sky is permanently the color of dried blood and the creatures are twisted beyond recognition. That is what Melenia's rot did to an entire region in a single moment. She didn't win the battle. Radahn was infected, but not killed, driven mad by the rot, reduced from a legendary warrior king to a feral, mindless creature scavenging on the battlefield of his own defeat. And Melenia didn't emerge victorious either. She was so spent, so damaged by the unleashing of her own power, that she retreated. Her followers carried her to the Haligtree, the sacred tree. Her brother Miquella had grown specifically as a sanctuary for her, a place where the rot might be healed. She sleeps there, sealed in a cocoon when the player finds her. And when you wake her, because of course you have to wake her, she doesn't emerge angry or disoriented. She emerges deliberate, purposeful, a warrior who has simply been waiting. Her opening words to you are some of the most quietly devastating in the game. She tells you that she has never known defeat, that every scar she carries, every limb she has lost, she did so at her own hand, that her losses were never imposed on her by an enemy, but chosen by her. That the rot is hers, that she is its goddess. It is a statement of absolute ownership over suffering, a refusal to be defined by what has been done to her, insisting instead on being defined by what she has chosen. Whether you find it noble or simply heartbreaking probably depends on who you are. Miquella, the eternal child, if Melenia's curse is physical, a body that destroys itself and everything around it, then Miquella's curse is temporal, existential. In some ways, even more disturbing, Miquella is cursed with eternal childhood, condemned to exist as a child forever. No matter how much time passes, no matter how much knowledge he accumulates, how much power he develops, how deep his understanding of the world grows, his body simply will not age. He is trapped in the form of a young child for eternity. A mind of profound depth and complexity housed in a body that the world will never take seriously. And Miquella's mind is extraordinary. He is arguably the most gifted of all Marika's children when it comes to pure intellectual and magical capability. He developed his own form of sacred order, one that did not discriminate based on lineage or divine favor, that was open to the Albinaurics and the forgotten peoples that the Golden Order had marginalized. He grew the Haligtree, an enormous sacred tree to rival the Erdtree itself, through sheer dedication and magical expertise, as a sanctuary for those the Golden Order had abandoned. He developed a special golden needle capable of resisting the influence of outer gods, the very needle that can slow Melenia's rot, or that the player can use to resist the frenzied flame. He is gentle where other demigods are cruel, thoughtful where others are impulsive. Genuinely invested in the well-being of people the powerful tend to forget. And yet, he is also the demigod who, in the DLC, is revealed to have a plan of terrifying ambition, a plan we will explore in detail in a later segment. Because Miquella's gentleness and his ambition are not in contradiction. They are the same thing expressed at different scales. He cares so much about fixing the brokenness of the world that he is willing to do genuinely monstrous things to achieve it. But that comes later. What matters here is the image of him as the game presents him in the base content. You find him in Mohgwyn Palace, the underground domain of Mohg, Lord of Blood, who had kidnapped him and was attempting to use Miquella's power to elevate himself to godhood. Miquella is cocooned in an enormous egg of golden matter, pale arm dangling from its opening, ethereally beautiful and absolutely motionless. He was trying to grow up, to use the cocoon to finally age past the curse of eternal childhood, to shed the body that the world refused to let mature. Mohg interrupted that process, stole him, used him, and when you kill Mohg and approach the cocoon and pull on that pale arm, nothing happens. Miquella is gone. His body remains hollowed, but whatever made Miquella Miquella has already left. He departed of his own will, for his own reasons, to begin the next phase of his plan. The child who was cursed to never grow up found his own way to leave the body behind entirely. What the shattering really was stepping back from the individual tragedies, Melinia's rot, Miquella's childhood, Godwyn's death, Radahn's madness, Renala's grief. The shattering in its totality is something specific and terrible. It is what happens when a system built on control and immortality finally encounters something it cannot manage. Marika built an order that was supposed to last forever. She removed death. She elevated her children to demigodhood. She created a civilization of grace and golden light. And it worked. For a long time it worked. But the system had a flaw built into its very foundation. Because the greater will's order is not a living thing, it doesn't adapt, it doesn't forgive. It doesn't account for grief, or love, or the complexity of beings who are simultaneously divine and human. When Godwyn died, when death found its way back into the world despite everything Marika had done to prevent it, the system had no mechanism for absorbing that shock, so it broke. Marika broke it deliberately, or grief broke it through her. The distinction may not matter. The result is the same. The grace of gold then returned to the tarnished, beckoning them back to the lands between so that one might repair the shattered Elden Ring and become the new Elden Lord. The greater will's solution to the collapse of its system was to summon new servants, new candidates. The tarnished, those exiled soldiers and their descendants, wandering the Badlands beyond the Sea of Fog, were called home, given back the grace that had been stripped from them, pointed toward the broken Elden Ring and the warring demigods and told implicitly, "Fix this. You are not a hero in this story. You are a tool, a replacement part for a cosmic machine that broke down." The question the game quietly asks, in its endings, in its NPC questlines, in the choices it offers you at the very end, is whether you're willing to just fix the machine, or whether you might want to do something else entirely with the power you've gathered. That question becomes urgent in the segments ahead. Why is Liurnia sinking? The Lake of Rot, let's start at the surface, because the surface of Liurnia already contains a mystery that points directly downward. Liurnia of the Lakes is one of the most visually distinctive regions in the game. A vast, shallow inland sea dotted with ruins and half-submerged towers, presided over by the enormous Academy of Raya Lucaria, the great school of sorcery where Renala once ruled, where the scholars devoted themselves to the study of stars and glintstone and cosmic magic. It is melancholy and beautiful in a way that feels specific, like something that was once grand and is now in the slow process of being swallowed, and that is exactly what is happening. Liurnia is sinking. Slowly, inexorably, the entire region is being pulled downward. The rocky foundations beneath the lakes are deteriorating. Buildings that were once on solid ground are now half-submerged. The whole region has the feel of a place that knows it is being consumed and has simply accepted it. But why? No item description directly explains why Liurnia is doomed to be swallowed by the earth. But once you find the Lake of Rot, things become clearer. Liurnia is located directly above the subterranean Lake of Rot, where the outer god of Rot was sealed. That dangerous substance leaks upward, explaining why the rocky foundations of the city have been deteriorating for ages. The Lake of Rot is one of the most genuinely oppressive environments in the game. Found deep underground in the Ainsel River region, it is an enormous subterranean body of pure scarlet rot, a lake not of water, but of the same corrosive, transformative substance that covers Caelid, that lives inside Melinia, that was unleashed on the battlefield of Ionia. Standing in it damages you constantly and rapidly. Crossing it requires careful navigation and significant preparation, and it is not simply a natural body of liquid. It is the sealed location of an outer god, the outer god of Rot itself, sometimes associated with or identified as the Scarlet Rot God, the cosmic entity whose influence Melania carries within her body. At some point in the deep past, this entity was contained here, sealed underground. Kept away from the surface world by the weight of the earth above it, but containment is not the same as elimination. The rot leaks. Slowly, constantly, it seeps upward through the rock and soil, and the foundations of Liurnia, built directly above this sealed cosmic horror, have been absorbing that contamination for generations. The city is not sinking because of geological instability or flooding. It is sinking because the ground beneath it is being rotted away, molecule by molecule, by the contained power of an imprisoned god. This also reframes Melania in an interesting way. Her curse is not simply a birth defect or a divine punishment. She is, in some sense, a walking vessel for this same outer god, a channel through which the rot god expresses itself in the surface world. When she unleashed the bloom at Ionia, she was not simply losing control of a personal affliction. She was briefly becoming a conduit for something ancient and cosmic, something that has been sealed underground for ages and yearns, in whatever way a god yearns, to be free. Caelid is what that freedom looks like, an entire region transformed into the rot god's image. The Nox, banished beneath the earth, now we go deeper. Past the lake of rot, past the Ainsel River, into a region of the game that many players reach only late in their journey, if at all, the eternal cities of Nokron and Nixtella. These are two enormous subterranean cities, buried impossibly deep beneath the surface of the lands between, lit by a perpetual false night sky, stars that are not stars, constellations that exist underground in caverns so vast that the ceiling disappears into darkness. They are among the most visually stunning locations in the entire game, ghostly, beautiful, melancholy. The architecture suggests a civilization of real sophistication, grand staircases, ornate buildings, streets that once must have been full of life. Now they are empty. Populated only by the spectral echoes of the people who once lived there, and by silver tears, liquid creatures that can reshape themselves into mimicries of anything they encounter. The twin eternal cities of Nokron and Nixtella raise questions about their unusual location. Lore hidden in the Nox swordstress armor reveals that the Nox, having angered the Greater Will ages ago, were banished underground as punishment. The Nox were a people, a civilization, and they did something that the Greater Will found intolerable. They reached too far. They attempted to contact the greater cosmos directly, without the mediation of the Two Fingers and the established hierarchy of the Golden Order. They tried to build their own Fingerslayer blade, a weapon capable of harming the Two Fingers themselves, the physical intermediaries of the Greater Will's will in the lands between. This was not just rebellion. It was an attempt to strike at the mechanism through which the Greater Will controls the world. It was the Nox declaring that they did not recognize the authority of the cosmic order that governed their lives, and proving that declaration with a weapon designed to unmake the enforcers of that order. The Greater Will's response was not war. It didn't need to wage war. It simply reached down and buried them. The Nox were not killed. They were relocated. Their cities were pushed underground, sealed beneath the earth, cut off from the sky and the stars they had loved and studied. The Greater Will took from them the very thing their civilization had been built around: celestial observation, cosmic connection, the relationship between mortal eyes and the infinite dark above, and replaced it with a false sky. Underground stars. A parody of the cosmos they had been separated from. There is something specifically cruel about that punishment. The Greater Will didn't simply remove them from the surface world. It gave them a simulation of what they lost. Stars that aren't stars, a night sky that isn't a sky. An eternity of looking upward at a ceiling dressed as infinity, and the Fingerslayer blade, the weapon they created, the thing that provoked all of this, is still there, hidden in Nokron. A treasure you can find and retrieve if you know where to look. A weapon designed to kill gods, sitting in the ruins of the civilization that was destroyed for making it. The Albinaurics, created and abandoned among the many peoples of the lands between, few are as quietly heartbreaking as the Albinaurics. They are a created people, not born, but made. Crafted through the magical arts of Liurnia, an attempt to create artificial life using the principles of sorcery and the power of the glintstone that permeates the region. They look almost human, pale, fragile, with frog-like features in their first generation and a more humanoid but still distinctly non-human appearance in their second. And they are dying. Not quickly and dramatically, but slowly and inevitably. The first generation, the frog-like Albinaurics you encounter in villages and caves throughout Liurnia, are becoming stone. Their lower bodies are already petrified in many cases, transformed from living flesh into cold rock, a condition that spreads upward as they age. The second generation, taller, more humanoid, found in deeper locations, have a different but equally terminal affliction. They were created with a fundamental flaw. Whether that flaw was the result of imperfect craft, insufficient understanding of what it means to create life, or simple indifference on the part of their creators, the result is the same. The Albinaurics are a people built with an expiration date, and the Golden Order doesn't care. The Albinaurics have no grace. They are not blessed. They fall outside the system of divine favor that governs rebirth and grace and the cycle of life and death in the lands between. When they die, they simply die. They don't return through the Erd Tree. They are not accounted for in the cosmic order. They are people who exist in the margins of a world that does not acknowledge their existence as valid. This is why Miquella's project, the Haligtree, the alternative sacred order he was developing, was so significant to them. Miquella explicitly welcomed the Albinaurics. His sacred order had no requirement of grace, no hierarchy of divine favor. It was open to those the Golden Order excluded. And so when the Haligtree was established, many Albinaurics made the dangerous journey across the consecrated snowfield to reach it, seeking the one demigod who had acknowledged that they mattered. You find them there, in the Haligtree, guarding it, tending to it, fighting for it with a ferocity that comes not from military training, but from the knowledge that this is the only place in the world that was ever built for them. They are some of the most difficult enemies in the late game, not because they are powerful in any conventional sense, but because they fight like people who have nothing else, like people defending the last thing that ever offered them dignity. Nixtella and the miniature Ranni deep within Nixtella, the eternal city, the deeper of the two buried cities, accessible through the Ainsel River region. There is a moment that is easy to miss, but quietly devastating. If the player is following Ranni's questline, the long, complex series of interactions with the witch who shed her body on the night of the Black Knives, they arrive in Nixtella carrying a miniature doll. A tiny effigy of Ranni herself, given to the player at a specific point in her questline. And in Nixtella, if you rest at a site of grace with that doll in your possession, the doll begins to speak. Ranni, in her small doll form, begins to talk to you about the city around you, about stars, about the dark, about what it means to walk forward into an uncertain future with no guarantee of what waits at the end. It is one of the most intimate moments in the entire game, a goddess who has shed her body, reduced to a palm-sized effigy, talking quietly to a person who has agreed to help her without fully knowing why. She tells you she is afraid, not of enemies, not of failure in any conventional sense, but of the unknown, of the path she has chosen to reject the greater will, to reject the destiny the Two Fingers mapped out for her, to pursue something entirely her own, and the fact that no one has walked it before. She cannot know what waits at the end. She has only the choice itself, and the dark road forward. It is the kind of moment that reminds you why this game, underneath all the brutal difficulty and cryptic lore and grotesque bosses, has stayed with so many people. Because it is ultimately a story about beings of enormous power who are still, in their most private moments, afraid of the same things everyone is afraid of, the unknown. The end, whether the choices they made were worth it. The deep-root depths, and the Prince of Death below even the eternal cities, at the very bottom of the world, is the deep-root depths. A vast underground space dominated by enormous roots, the roots of the Erd tree itself, descending from the surface world all the way down into the bedrock of the lands between. And here, at the very bottom, is where Godwyn ended up. Remember Godwyn the Golden, Marika's firstborn son, killed on the night of the Black Knives in a way specifically designed to destroy his soul while leaving his body alive. His soulless body was buried beneath the Erd tree, as close as possible to the place where the dead are normally recycled and reborn. The idea, perhaps, was that the Erd tree's proximity might eventually resolve his condition. That the system of grace and rebirth might find a way to process even something as unprecedented as a body without a soul. Instead, something else happened. Godwyn's deathless body began to spread. Without a soul to define its boundaries, without a self to contain its growth, his corpse became something else, something vast and spreading and utterly without consciousness. The roots of the Erd tree became entangled with his remains. His flesh spread through the soil, through the stone, through the foundations of the world. He is, by the time the player finds him, everywhere underground, every root that looks slightly too flesh-like, every corrupted growth in the depths, all of it is Godwyn. The enemy type, called Death's Poker, and the ulcerated tree spirits found throughout the underground regions are manifestations of this spreading corruption, creatures born from the intersection of Erd tree root and Godwyn's deathless flesh. The boundary between the world's sacred tree and the body of its first murdered prince has dissolved entirely. When you finally see Godwyn himself, really see him, his face and upper body visible through the roots in the deep-root depths, it is one of the most haunting images in the game. His face is peaceful, almost beatific. Eyes closed, features soft, the expression of a man in deep and untroubled sleep. Everything below his torso is lost in the spreading mass of roots and flesh. He is the most beautiful and most terrible thing in the depths. A golden prince, beloved, honored, genuinely good by all accounts, and this is what became of him. Not death, not rebirth, just endless, unconscious, spreading existence. A body without a mind, without a soul, without a self. Growing in the dark beneath the world, tangled in the roots of his mother's sacred tree forever. The death that was inflicted on him was not simply murder. It was a specifically designed horror. Whoever planned the night of the Black Knives, and the evidence points to Ranni, though her full motivations are complex, chose for Godwyn not just an ending but an eternity of this. An eternity of being without being. The Fingerslayer blade, and what it means. Let's return to Nokron for a moment, because the Fingerslayer blade deserves more attention than it usually gets. It is a hidden treasure, found deep in the eternal city of Nokron, and it is the primary object Ranni sends the player to retrieve during her questline. She needs it. It is essential to her plan, and understanding why tells you a great deal about what she is trying to do. The Fingerslayer blade is a weapon designed to harm the two fingers, the physical intermediaries of the greater will in the lands between. These are the strange, oversized finger-like creatures found in the Round Table Hold and in various sacred locations throughout the world, communicating the will of the greater will to those chosen to serve it. They are not gods. They are not even particularly powerful as entities. They are messengers, conduits, but they are also the mechanism through which the greater will exerts direct influence on the lands between, through which it selects Empyreans, communicates with chosen servants, and maintains its grip on the world it has colonized. The Nox created a weapon to kill them. They were punished for it by being buried alive beneath the earth. The weapon itself was sealed in the ruins of their civilization. Ranni wants it so she can use it at the Renna's Rise, the tower associated with her own sacred sigil, to sever her connection to the two fingers entirely, to cut the thread that connects her to the greater will's design for her, to make herself truly free in a way that no Empyrean before her has managed. When you retrieve the blade and give it to her, something changes in the world. A new path opens. The journey to the Moonlight Altar becomes possible. And Ranni's ending, the ending where the player becomes her consort, and she ascends to a distant moon, carrying the lands between into an age of stars rather than an age of order, becomes available. It is, in the game's taxonomy of endings, neither clearly good nor clearly bad. It is simply different. The age of the Erd Tree and the Greater will replaced by something unknown. A distant moon, stars without a fixed order, freedom or the void, depending on your perspective, but the weapon that makes it possible was made by a people who were buried for making it. And it worked. Thousands of years after the Nox were sealed underground, their greatest achievement, the thing they were punished for creating, was used by an Empyrean to do exactly what they designed it to do. There is something like justice in that. Delayed, imperfect, arrived at through a chain of tragedy, but justice of a kind. The underground as the true lands between what emerges from all of this, when you step back and look at the buried world as a whole, is that the underground of the lands between is not simply a dungeon. It is not just additional content beneath the surface map. It is the true history of the lands between. Every civilization that the Golden Order found inconvenient, every people that the Greater Will's system had no place for, every truth that the gleaming surface of Marika's empire needed to bury to maintain its image, all of it ended up here. The Nox, who dared to reach for the cosmos without permission. The Albinaurics, who were created without grace and therefore do not exist within the Golden Order's accounting of who matters. Godwyn, whose death was too strange and too terrible for the surface world to process. The Lake of Rot, the sealed outer god whose existence contradicts the story the Erd Tree tells about itself as the source of all life. The underground is the repressed, the buried. The things the Golden Order had to hide in order to tell the story it wanted to tell about itself. And when you descend, when you leave the golden surface world and go down into the dark, you are not going somewhere less important. You are going somewhere more true. The surface of the lands between is what the Greater Will wants you to see. The golden light, the sacred tree, the grace. The underground is what actually happened, the realm of shadow, what it is, and how to find it. Most players who complete Elden Ring without the DLC never even glimpse the realm of shadow. It exists on the same map as the lands between, hidden in plain sight, if you know where to look. South of the Erd Tree, on the original map, there is a region shrouded in cloud. Obscured, invisible behind a veil that the game never draws back unless you have the DLC installed and the specific conditions to enter it. The Shadow of the Erd Tree DLC takes players into the mysterious realm of shadow, a dark, death-filled version of the lands between. Hidden beneath a shrouded cloud south of the Erd Tree on the original map, this eerie realm is marked by ghostly tombstones, coffins, and the Scatter Tree, a shadowy counterpart to the Erd Tree. The Scatter Tree. This is one of the most important and least discussed elements of the DLC's setup. The Erd Tree, the golden, luminous, all-powerful sacred tree that dominates the skyline of the lands between, has a shadow, not metaphorically, literally. In the realm of shadow, there is another tree, vast and dark, a counterpart to the Erd Tree that mirrors it in form but inverts it in nature. Where the Erd Tree blazes with gold and pours grace into the world, the Scatter Tree is dim, dark, ash-colored. It does not radiate warmth. It presides over a realm of quiet and death, and things that were put here to be forgotten. The Scatter Tree's power is the primary progression mechanic of the DLC. You find Scatter Tree fragments scattered throughout the realm of shadow, and using them strengthens the player character in a way that the grace of the Erd Tree no longer does. As if to say, the Erd Tree's power means nothing here. Here you must draw from something older and darker to survive. The realm of shadow is not a hell. It is not a punishment dimension. It is something more specific and in some ways more disturbing. It is a place that was created, deliberately, by Marika, to serve a specific purpose. Who are the Horns sent? Before we can understand what the realm of shadow is and why it was created, we need to understand the people who lived there before Marika arrived. The people she made it for. The Horns sent is both a singular character and a race of people in Elden Ring, hailing from the realm of shadow. The character Horns sent, who is found alongside Frazier at the Three-Path Cross in Gravesite Plain, represents the larger group of Horns sent who were purged by Messmer the Impaler. The Horns sent were the old folk of the realm of shadow, an ancient people characterized physically by the horns they bear, curved, distinctive, the mark of a lineage and a culture that predated Marika's influence entirely. They had their own sacred traditions, their own relationship with the divine, their own history in the land that would become the realm of shadow, and Marika destroyed them, not all at once, not in a single dramatic confrontation, but systematically over time through the agency of someone she sent specifically for that purpose. Hornsent holds a deep grudge against the Erdtree, which they view as an enemy of their people, as well as Marika, whom they see as having betrayed them. Betrayed. That word is specific and important. The Hornsent don't simply see Marika as a conqueror, someone who came from outside and imposed her will on them through force alone. They see her as someone who betrayed them, someone they had a relationship with, someone they trusted, or at least dealt with, before the relationship curdled into something terrible. What was that relationship? What happened between Marika and the Hornsent before the betrayal? The DLC unfolds these answers slowly, through item descriptions and NPC dialogue and environmental storytelling, building toward a revelation about Marika's origins that reframes her entire story. Marika's secret origins here is the thing the base game never tells you directly, but the DLC makes impossible to ignore. Marika was not from the lands between. She came from the realm of shadow. She was, in some capacity, connected to the Hornsent and their world before she ascended to godhood. The realm of shadow was not simply a place she conquered and sealed off. It was, in some sense, where she came from, her homeland. The world she left behind, or more precisely, the world she buried, sealed, and hid beneath a shroud of cloud on the map, because its existence was incompatible with the story she needed the Golden Order to believe about her. Queen Marika also sent her son Messmer and an army of outcasts on a crusade to destroy the Hornsent, the old folk who dwelled in the land of the Tower. She trapped them in the realm of shadow to protect herself from the base serpent and to conceal her shrouded origins. To conceal her shrouded origins, there it is. The realm of shadow exists, at least in part, as a secret, as a cover-up. Marika sealed this entire realm, trapped people in it, sent armies to purge its inhabitants, hid it behind an invisible wall on the map, because what is there, what happened there, and who she was before she became the Eternal Queen, cannot be allowed to become part of the official history of the Golden Order. The Golden Order's legitimacy rests on Marika's divine nature, on the story that she was chosen by the greater will, elevated to godhood, and built an empire of grace and order from a position of divine authority. If people knew who she was before, where she came from, what she did to get where she is, what she sacrificed, and who she destroyed along the way, that story becomes much more complicated, so she hid it. All of it. Underground, behind cloud and shadow, sealed away in a realm where the people who knew the truth were either dead or trapped and voiceless. Messmer the Impaler, the son who was erased and the instrument of that concealment, the weapon she used to purge the Hornsent and maintain the silence of the realm of shadow, was her son, Messmer the Impaler. Messmer is one of the most visually striking figures in the DLC. Tall, angular, draped in red, his serpents of flame coiling around him like living extensions of his fury. He moves with a kind of controlled, deliberate violence, a soldier who has been given an impossible task and has spent so long performing it that he has become it entirely. His boss fight is widely considered one of the best in the entire game, not just mechanically, but emotionally. Because by the time you fight him, if you have paid attention to his story, you understand that he is not simply an antagonist, he is a tragedy. Messmer the Impaler purged the Haunsent, the old folk of the Realm of Shadow, on Marika's orders. He came to the Realm of Shadow at the head of an army, and he did what armies do when they are sent to eliminate a people. He burned, he impaled. He destroyed with thoroughness and without mercy, because that was what his mother asked of him. And then Marika sealed him in there too, not as a punishment exactly, but because Messmer, like the Realm of Shadow itself, was something that couldn't be part of the public face of the Golden Order. He was a secret son, born of a union that complicated the official narrative. His existence and the knowledge of what he had done on Marika's behalf had to stay hidden in the same place he had been sent to keep hidden. Messmer never came home. He completed his mission and was left there. In the Realm of Shadow, ruling over the ruins of the civilization he had destroyed, guarding the secrets of a mother who had already moved on to build the gleaming empire of gold that history would remember her for. His fire, the red, serpentine flame that defines his visual identity, is not the golden flame of the Erd Tree. It is something older, something that connects to the Realm of Shadow's own sacred traditions, something that Messmer carries in his blood from a lineage that the Golden Order refused to acknowledge. He is the child of Marika, who was given her dirtiest work and then sealed away with the evidence. And yet he remained loyal. In his own broken, consuming way, he continued to serve the mission he had been given, to protect the Realm of Shadow's secrets, to keep the Haunsent suppressed, to hold the line against anyone who might come to uncover what was buried there, until Miquella arrived. And everything changed again. Miquella's plan, Love as a Weapon Miquella, cursed with eternal youth, plays a central role in the DLC as he seeks to complete a ritual to achieve godhood. To accomplish this, he plans to capture Radahn's soul and place it in Mohg's body, using his rebirth as a means to stand at the gates of divinity. Let's slow down here. Because Miquella's plan in the DLC is one of the most morally complex things in the entire game, and it deserves to be understood fully before it is judged. Miquella, you will remember, is the eternal child. The demigod cursed to never age, never grow, never be taken seriously by a world that equates physical maturity with authority and power. He is also perhaps the most genuinely compassionate of all Marika's children, the one who built the Halig Tree for those the Golden Order excluded, who developed the Golden Needle to help people resist the influence of outer gods, who seemed, more than anyone else in the Golden Order's lineage, to actually care about the people living beneath the divine hierarchy rather than just the hierarchy itself. But the DLC reveals that Miquella's compassion and his ambition have grown into something that cannot be cleanly separated from each other. He has a plan. A real, specific, detailed plan to fix what he sees as the fundamental brokenness of the world. And the plan is genuinely terrible in its execution, even as it may be sincere in its motivation. He left his cocoon. He shed his body, or most of it, his physical form remaining behind in Mohg's palace while his soul moved forward and entered the Realm of Shadow with a specific purpose. He intends to ascend to godhood. Not through the Greater Will's design, not through the Two Fingers selection process, but through his own ritual, through his own accumulation of power and devotion. And the mechanism he chose for that ascension is love. Miquella is an Empyrean. Like his mother before him, he has the capacity to become a vessel for cosmic power. But unlike Marika, who had the Greater Will's backing, Miquella intends to power his ascension through the love and devotion of those who follow him. He is, in essence, attempting to become a god by becoming genuinely beloved. by gathering the faith and devotion of everyone who chooses to follow him, and using that accumulated love as the fuel for divine ascension. It sounds, on the surface, almost beautiful. A God built on love rather than on cosmic authority. A divine power that comes from below rather than from above. But here is where it becomes dark. Miquella is not simply inspiring love, he is compelling it. Somewhere in the development of his plan, Miquella made a decision, or perhaps discovered a capacity within himself that he then chose to use to strip away the agency of those who follow him. To take their love by force, in a sense. To draw out of them a devotion that feels real and chosen, but is not entirely either. Several NPCs in the DLC mention this. They speak of being drawn to Miquella with an intensity that feels overwhelming, all-consuming, as if the love they feel has expanded to fill every part of them, leaving no room for doubt or resistance. Followers of Miquella in the DLC have given up everything, identity, history, previous loyalty, to serve him. And the eerie quality of their devotion is that they don't seem to experience this as a loss. They are, by their own account, happy, fulfilled, but they are not free. Miquella's connection to St. Trina, revealed in the DLC, shows that they are two manifestations of the same being, much like the duality of Radagon and Marika. St. Trina, the gentle, sleepy saint associated with mist and torpor and the quiet surrender of consciousness, is Miquella. Another face of the same divided soul. Where Miquella is awake and active and purposeful, St. Trina is passive and dreaming and drawing people into a somnolent peace. Two expressions of the same being, one reaching outward with ambition and the other pulling inward with a kind of gentle, suffocating calm. The duality mirrors Marika and Radagon, and it raises an uncomfortable question. Is this pattern, this fracturing of self into two, something specific to these individuals? Or is it something that happens to any being who reaches toward godhood in the lands between? Does ascension require a splitting of the self? Does the weight of divine power break a person into two because no single self can contain it? Radagon's soul, the chosen vessel to complete his ritual, Miquella needs a consort, a partner, someone to stand beside him at the threshold of godhood, as Godfrey once stood beside Marika. He chose Radagon, not the Radagon who was driven mad by Melinia's rot. Not the Radagon who scavenged the battlefield of Ionia in mindless hunger. But Radagon's soul, the essential self of the man who was, before everything fell apart, one of the greatest warriors and most genuinely admirable figures the Golden Order produced. Miquella plans to capture Radagon's soul and place it in Mohg's body, using his rebirth as a means to stand at the gates of divinity. Mohg's body, the body of the Lord of Blood, whose underground palace is where Miquella's physical form still rests in its cocoon, becomes the vessel. Radagon's soul is captured, placed within it, and the resulting being is reborn. Not quite Radagon, not quite Mohg. Something new formed from pieces of both, shaped by Miquella's design. The final boss of the DLC, Radagon, consort of Miquella, is this being, and he is devastating. Not just mechanically, though the fight is widely considered among the hardest in the entire game, but emotionally, because you are fighting something that was once a person you may have respected, reassembled against its nature in service of someone else's vision of a better world. Did Radagon choose this? Did his soul consent to being captured, transferred, reborn in a different body, renamed as someone's consort? The game doesn't give you a clean answer. What it gives you is the image of a warrior, recognizable, still carrying the gravity magic and the ferocity that defined him, fighting in Miquella's name in a realm that was built on concealment and sacrifice. Aigon and Bale, a side story that deserves the spotlight in the middle of all this cosmic weight. Sealed realms, secret suns, godhood rituals, fractured souls. The DLC gives you one of the most human stories in the entire game. Aigon and Bale the Dread. Aegon is a tragic and vengeful character whose soul is consumed by pain and a burning need for revenge against the dread dragon Bael. Severely injured and broken, Aegon can be heard screaming in agony, cursing the dragon for the torment he endures, vowing vengeance. Aegon is not a demigod. He is not a cosmic force. He is not part of the grand machinery of the Greater Will or the Golden Order or any of the epoch-defining conflicts that define the main narrative of the DLC. He is simply a man, a Drake warrior, who was broken by a dragon and has spent everything he has left trying to find a way to make that dragon afraid. He created his own weapon, Aegon's harpoon, a great arrow adorned with sharp gravel stone pieces specifically designed to be deadly against dragons, with the hope that Bael himself would feel fear. The harpoon represents Aegon's obsession and relentless drive to defeat Bael, even if it means fighting from beyond the grave. When you encounter Aegon in the DLC, he is barely functional. Broken, screaming, held together by fury and nothing else. His armor, a mismatched and tattered collection of battle-worn pieces that reflect his past as a scavenger on the battlefield, including a helm shaped like a bugle, filthy armor, and tattered gauntlets, tells you everything about what he has become. A man who gave up everything ordinary about his existence in pursuit of one thing. He cannot fight Bael himself anymore. His body won't allow it, so he asks you to do it. And if you accept, if you go to Bael's domain and begin the fight, Aegon appears. Not as a summon in the conventional sense, but as a presence. You can hear him, screaming encouragement and fury from somewhere outside the arena, his voice cracking with something that is equal parts anguish and exhilaration. It is one of the most memorable moments in the DLC. Not because of the lore implications, not because it reveals something about the Golden Order or the nature of the cosmos, but because it is about a broken person getting, through you, the chance to be part of the ending of the thing that broke him. When Bael dies, Aegon's screaming reaches a pitch that is almost incoherent with relief. He wanted that dragon to feel fear. He spent everything trying to make it happen, and in the end, he got it. In a game full of cosmic tragedies and divine betrayals and millennia spanning political machinations, Aegon's story is about something much smaller and much more human. About the specific way grief and rage can become a person's entire identity. And about what it means, after so long, to finally be able to let it go. What the DLC tells us about the Golden Order standing back from the specific characters and stories of the Realm of Shadow. The DLC, as a whole, makes an argument about the Golden Order that is darker and more specific than anything the base game asserts. The base game shows you the collapse of the Golden Order, the shattering, the aftermath, the broken demigods and the ruined civilization, and the player picking through the wreckage, trying to put it back together. It lets you draw your own conclusions about whether the Golden Order was worth restoring, worth replacing, or worth ending entirely. The DLC shows you the foundation, and the foundation is not gold, it is concealment, it is sacrifice. It is a secret realm full of people who were destroyed to protect a story. It is a son who was sent to do terrible things and then sealed away so the evidence couldn't surface. It is a goddess who came from somewhere she could never acknowledge, who did things she could never admit, who built an empire of grace and order on top of a buried history of violence and betrayal. The Hornsent, the people Messmer purged on Marika's orders, view the Erd Tree as an enemy of their people and Marika as someone who betrayed them. They are not wrong. They are the people who were there when the Empire was being built, and they remember what it cost, and they were sealed away specifically so that their memory could not become part of the official record. The Realm of Shadow is the truest portrait of what the Golden Order actually is. Not a divine gift, not a system of grace and abundance freely given by a benevolent goddess, but an empire like any other empire, built on conquest and concealment and the systematic destruction of every alternative to itself. Marika is not a villain in a simple sense. The game is too honest and too complex for that. She is a person who wanted something: order, permanence, an end to the chaos and death that defined the world before her, and pursued it with a completeness and a ruthlessness that required her to become capable of things she may have initially found unthinkable. And then, over a very long time, those things became simply what she did. The cost of maintaining the world she had built, the realm of shadow, is the bill for that world, presented finally in full. The Scatter Tree and what it represents. The Scatter Tree, the dark counterpart to the Erd Tree, the shadow tree that presides over the realm of shadow, is not simply a visual motif or a gameplay mechanic. It is the Erd Tree's conscience. Where the Erd Tree represents everything the Golden Order wants to show the world: grace, gold, light, abundance, the blessed cycle of life and rebirth. The Scatter Tree stands in the dark and represents everything the Golden Order buried to maintain that image. It does not shine. It does not pour grace into the world. It simply stands in the shadow, rooted in the same earth, drawing from the same source, and it is dark because the light never reached it. The player draws power from the Scatter Tree's fragments in the DLC. In practical terms, this means you are literally empowered by what was hidden, strengthened by the buried history that the surface world wanted you never to find. You cannot progress through the realm of shadow on the grace of the Erd Tree alone. The Erd Tree's power is insufficient here. To survive in the place where the truths are kept, you have to accept power from the truths themselves. It is one of the most elegant pieces of mechanical storytelling in the entire game. The DLC is harder than the base game. You are weaker here, initially, despite having conquered the lands between entirely. Because the skills and the power and the framework the base game gave you were built for a world that is, fundamentally, a carefully maintained lie. In the place where the lie cannot hold, you have to find a different source of strength. The live action film, what comes next before we close. It is worth noting that the story of Elden Ring is not finished being told. A live action film adaptation of Elden Ring was announced in May 2025 to be produced by A24 and Bandai Namco, with Alex Garland chosen to direct and write the screenplay. Alex Garland, the writer and director behind films like Ex Machina and 28 Days Later and Annihilation, is perhaps the single most fitting choice imaginable for this material. His work is defined by exactly the qualities that make Elden Ring's lore so compelling. The slow revelation of a world that is not what it initially appears to be. The examination of power and consciousness and the price of ambition. The willingness to sit with ambiguity, to let questions remain open, to trust the audience to carry meaning that is not spelled out for them. What a film adaptation does with the deliberately fragmented, player-assembled nature of Elden Ring's narrative will be fascinating to watch. The game tells its story through absence as much as presence, through what is not shown, not said, not explained. A film has to make different choices. It has to show you a face, give a voice to a character, make explicit what the game left implicit. Whether Garland threads that needle, preserving the mystery while making the emotion accessible, is one of the most interesting creative questions in adaptation right now. A final thought: what the lands between is actually about 5 segments. Hours of lore. Cosmic entities and buried civilizations and fractured gods and cursed children and secret realms and dragon warriors and eternal children reaching for godhood. And underneath all of it, if you trace every thread back to its source, Elden Ring is about one thing: the cost of order. Every system of order, every empire, every religion, every hierarchy that organizes the world and tells people where they belong in it, is built on something. On choices made by people with power, choices that benefited some and destroyed others, choices that were made in the dark and never fully acknowledged in the light. The Greater will impose order on the lands between and called it grace. Marika built an empire on that order and called it blessing. The Erdtree fed on the dead and called it rebirth. The Nox were buried for wanting to reach beyond the system and called it punishment. The Hornsent were purged for being inconvenient, and the realm where it happened was sealed and called nothing, because nothing that happened there was ever meant to be known. And the Tarnished, you, the player, are called back from exile and told to fix the broken ring and restore the order and become the new lord of this carefully constructed world. The game's endings ask, quietly, whether you want to, whether the order is worth restoring, whether something genuinely new might be better, whether the lands between deserves a different kind of light than the one the Erdtree provides. There are no clean answers. There never are in stories that are honest about power, but there is the asking. And in a game that could have simply given you a world to conquer, and a boss to kill, and a throne to claim, the fact that it asks, seriously, carefully, in the language of item descriptions, and hidden lore and cryptic NPC dialogue, and secret realms buried beneath the earth. That is the thing that makes it matter. The lands between is a world that swallowed its own history to survive. The question is whether you give it back the same history or something better.